Testing, testing. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Testing. Testing, testing. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Testing. Testing, testing. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Testing, testing.
hand it over. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out this evening, and we look forward to engaging you in this community conversation. We are live streaming the event, so I want to be mindful of remaining in focus here with the camera, and our camera person, Sarah, is also making sure we get the slides in the view as well. So this will be uploaded to YouTube on our site, and also provide those that are viewing from the comfort of their own home the opportunity to participate and hear some of what is shared this evening. So my name is Dr. Barbara Russell, and I serve as the superintendent. If we have not crossed paths, I really appreciate you coming out this evening, and happy to entertain any follow-up questions or comments you might have after this evening's conversation. Sometimes in a larger setting like this, it can be challenging or difficult to actually have the conversation you might want to have. Happy to do that afterwards, so don't hesitate to follow up. I am joined this evening by Mr. Dean Miller, who is our safety supervisor here in Perkiomen Valley, and provides oversight to the school security personnel and all things safety, really, in Perkiomen Valley. We also have with us this evening Chief David Boyer, who is a school police officer with the Springford Area School District, and another individual on his team is Lieutenant Gwen Phillips, also a school police officer at Springford Area School District. Springford is an example of a school district that has its own school police force. We've also looked at Souderton, a different model, but similar in some respects, another neighboring district. In a lot of districts, most of the districts in Montgomery County have at least one school police officer or resource officer, and we'll talk to you tonight about the different terminology along with security personnel. And we'll also talk to you about the why this is being discussed right now among the administrative team. So, to begin this evening, our agenda here, we'll talk to you about some of the different sorts of security personnel, and we'll allow Chief Boyer and Lieutenant Phillips to actually share with you some of their firsthand experiences in these roles for a school district, some of their history, and how that serves them in their roles in the school district. And then we'll talk a little bit about what might serve Perkiomen Valley School District. Where do we go from here based on what we're learning? And what else do we think about as we consider the health and safety of our students? That's also something that we'll talk about this evening. And again, happy to entertain your questions. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Miller, and he's really going to take the bulk of the conversation. Very quickly, before I do that, most of the conversations that I initiate at the board level or in board settings, community meeting or superintendent roundtable settings, I really like to reference our shared beliefs and our mission statement. And we think a lot about nurturing, cultivating safe and supportive school communities, as well as strengthening our partnerships. So I just want to call that out tonight before I turn it over to Mr. Miller. So thinking about those aspects of our school experience as we consider some of the ideas that will be shared tonight. So thank you.
This one? Good evening. I appreciate you all coming out tonight to engage us in this conversation. Thank you, Dr. Russell, for the introduction. Just a little bit before we get going, my background has been in law enforcement my entire career. I was a police officer in Lansdale, Montgomery County, born and raised here in Collegeville, graduated from Perkiomen Valley a few years ago. I'll just leave it at that. Served in fire department my whole life, been involved with emergency management, emergency medical, so when Dr. Russell talks all things safety, I feel like I've seen a lot in that regard. And I got involved in school safety about 20 years ago. I became a DARE officer in the North Penn School District and served there for almost 20 years and had a lot of interactions with the North Penn School District and the parochial schools that are in that area. So, but fast forward to today, and we're seeing a lot different environments in our schools, as I'm sure you'll agree. But what we're going to talk about tonight is the people in protective roles inside of our schools. What's that look like? So we're going to talk about three different definitions that the state is using right now to define it. There are SSOs, school security officers, SPOs, school police officers, and SROs, which are school resource officers. They all have slightly different roles, slightly different definitions that put them in the places that they're at, but I want to just step right through them for you so you have an understanding as we talk about these back and forth tonight. A school security officer is the present role that we have here at Perkiomen Valley. We had been contracting employees with a private vendor for a number of years, and we converted to hiring more of our own personnel here within the district just this last year. So we brought on 8 school security officers within our district. Some of you know Mike Horan, who serves at the high school. He's been with us about 20 years, and he was serving in a school police role, but before the state changed that definition. So it was a pretty wide area, if you will, a number of years back, where you could pretty much get sworn in as a school police officer with a local judge's authority, and that would all be that you needed to take on that role. That has changed dramatically since a lot of the events we have seen nationwide and with legislation that the state has put out. So a school security officer is an individual you can see here. I'm not going to read it to you verbatim, but he's employed either by a school district or by a private vendor. He has certain roles that he can do to protect the environment of the school, routine safety plans. He has not been granted powers of police or duties of police, but he assists in many ways the administration of the school. And he does not facilitate discipline. Just want you to understand that. They can provide a number of the services that are listed here when it comes to disruptive students or security at events and programs that are going on, and certainly have interaction with the youth that are in our schools and the families for that matter. So you'll see over here the Jacksonville Police Department highlighting one of their school security officers that was caught the eye of one of their students during a day when they were dressing up for what they wanted to be in their future. And you'll hear a little bit more about that from our friends at Springford in a few minutes. What we currently have in the district is 9 school security officers that are directly employed, so the 8 that we brought on plus Mr. Horan. And then we have 7 contracted school security officers that work through a company, APC, out of Collegeville, and they do all the contracted work also for our athletics, our weekend security, and any events that we have in the evening. So they supplement what we're doing. So we have a few of them in during the day. The bulk of the APC contracted people work in the evenings. And that's been a program that we've had in place, Mr. Weaver, for 20 years. We've had some form of contracted security. When I mentioned the law changed in 2018, when the act was changed to school police and school security personnel, they also said that you have to have a certain level of training. And that's where some of the problems arose, is that some of these contracted people that we're using were not afforded that training. So they weren't at the level that is now mandated by the state. So that was a concern to me when I came to the district 4 years ago, and Dr. Russell and Mr. Weaver and I had some conversations about where we'd like to go, what would we be doing, what's the community want us to do. And certainly one of those things is we have to obey what the law tells us we have to do when it comes to these roles. So we take a hard look at the number of people we have out and what they can provide to us during the day, during the evening, what level of safety and security are we comfortable with. School police officers can be employed either by the school or, again, contracted. They can work in the public school, they can work in a private school, they can be in a number of roles. You'll see here they can be an independent contractor or a third-party vendor. You have to be appointed by the judge of the Court of Common Pleas, so they formulated that and said that you have to have a part of that. And there are some things in the background that happen here. So currently certified law enforcement officers that, let's say they retire and they want to come into a school role, there is a transitioning process that's in place within the law for them to do that, or we can bring them in other manners. You'll have a note down here at the bottom about what these independent contractors may look like. retired state, federal, municipal, or military police officers, and the like. And then a third-party vendor is now defined by the state. So if you want to hire a school police officer, they have to be on the state's list of approved personnel. Not school security, but school police officers. And then the last role that we talk about is a school resource officer. For all intents and purposes, very much the same as a school police officer. The difference here is that school resource officers are already employed by another jurisdictional authority. So in our case, we deal with Lower Frederick Police, we deal with the Collegeville Police, and we deal with the Pennsylvania State Police. So they would have to come from that field in order to be considered a school resource officer. They are not direct employees of a school district. Okay? They're stationed here by an agreement, what we call an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding, that we would have with those jurisdictional authorities on what they do and how they do it. The Pennsylvania State Police cannot provide the manpower to do that for us. Because if they do it for us here in Perkiomen Valley, they have to do it for the other 499 districts across the state. And that adds up really quick. And during the unfortunate circumstance of Trooper Siska's funeral, we had the opportunity to talk to some high-ranking officials within the state police. And as much as they would love to do it, they told us right out that it just will not happen. It's just such a cumbersome responsibility for them to take on that role in many of these smaller and rural school districts that are around the state that they can't afford to do it. We get good service from them when we call. Occasionally we'll see them come to our buildings, and frequently they might park on our lots, but they can't provide the level of service that a school resource officer could. Likewise, Lower Frederick and Collegeville Police are not of a size that they can afford to leave us manpower to do a school resource officer role. The woman in the center of this picture is a friend of mine, Dr. Beth Sanborn. She's a police detective in Lower Gwinnett Township, and she's a school police officer, just like Gwen is. Beth serves in the Wissahickon School District. What they do at Wissahickon is they have agreed with the Lower Gwinnett Township Police, where Beth works, to have her on site, to have her do this role. So this is what she does when she's on shift. She's not out on patrol, she's in the schools. So that's the difference between the three levels of school police, school resource, and school security officers. What we'd like to do as we go forward tonight, as you see the rest of the presentation, is have school police officers act in the role of resource officers. They're very much interchangeable, and you'll see a little bit more about that in a few minutes. What I'd like to do now is ask Chief Boyer and Lieutenant Phillips to tell you a little bit about how the school police evolved in the Springford School District and what it looks like. Chief Boyer.
Okay, I'm Dave Boyer. I am the chief of the school police for Springford School District. A little bit about myself. I worked at East Norton Police Department for 28 years. I retired as detective sergeant there. After I retired, I went to Mainline Health for about 14 months, and then Act 44 came into place, like Dean just said, and things changed for school policing. I was able to get hired at Springford School District, and my marching orders were pretty easy. Our superintendent was named Dave Gooden. He goes, basically, we weren't able to get a school resource officer from the local police departments because right now, hiring for policing is pretty difficult. Not a whole lot of people want to be police officers right now. I want you to make a police department that is as professional and mandated as far as a municipality is. So he kind of like, let's go. I said, great. So we got involved with grant writing, we got involved with a lot of things, and we built our school police department up to 7 people at this point. So our school police department actually started back in 1998, and I air quote it because, again, they were unarmed security officers. There was 2 of them, but they called them school resource officers. And until those definitions changed, and until about 2008, that's when they started. These 2 part-time police officers were able to be armed. And the reason was 2008 because there were so many incidents going on about active shooters that were coming into schools. So again, the superintendent at the time being front runners, they wanted to have a situation where we could have our kids protected. So it doesn't really matter what the nomenclature is, whether it's a school safety officer, school resource officer, school police officer. We have very, very similar roles. And what's our main role is to protect students and staff. right, from any kind of violence that may occur, whether it's external or internal. So again, it's a lot of nomenclature, all these different titles and names. The only difference that we have to do now is, now that I've retired from actual municipal policing, is we all still have to go through a myriad of training. 16 hours with the state annually. Before you can become a school police officer, you have to go through 40 hours of basic school resource officer. Also, all of my folks are trained up on what's called the National Incident Management System. In case there's another kind of emergency besides an active shooter, we are going to run the scene in an emergency management situation. We also have to do a lot of training, like every educator does in every school district, when it comes to crisis management for kids, how to talk to kids, how to interact with kids, how to treat their problems. Because before I came here, there are so many different acronyms I had to learn. What's an IEP? What's a 504? This kid has this issue. You had no idea. I was used to arresting people and putting them in jail. Now you come to a situation, there might be another reason why this is happening. You have to sit back and listen. So for my first year or so, and Gwen will hopefully attest to this, I did a lot of listening and finding out exactly what our role is. And the metaphor I use is that, you go from a situation where you're basically almost on guard all the time to now a china closet. Every time you make a decision and every time you look a certain way or do a certain thing, something's going to crack in that plate rack if you're not smart about what you're doing. So again, I went and I asked educators, I asked administrators, I talked to Gwen a lot, some of our other officers, what's really the goal here? The goal really isn't to try to punish kids twice for something they may not be able to control. There's a disciplinary system for that. Our job is to do what? To cut down the time it's going to take if someone does something that's going to harm our kids. And again, think about response times, right? Up here you have the state police, Lower Frederick, and I forget the other police department, sorry, Dean. But what's the response time going to be if you have an active situation that occurs here? That's what you want to mitigate. Because if there is an issue, right, just historically for all the active shooter situations that have occurred over the last 30 years, you're looking at needing that thing intervened within the first minute, minute and a half to keep your, potential victim pool down. And again, these things don't happen very often, but they happen often enough to be something to be aware of. So we don't go into work every day thinking about, hey, listen, we're going to be arresting our kids for this or doing that. We try to support the administration as much as we can for whatever disciplinary issues are going on, and if we can help them, we do. But 99% of our time, we're either taking care of traffic control, which is never a problem in Perk Valley, I'm sure, or we're making sure that our situations, our protocols, how we train people are up to date. So I get to do all this scary stuff, basically, that kind of freaks people out when you talk about it, but it's a reality. It's a reality in schools now. You have to be prepared for these situations. Uvalde was just in May, and I call it the selective amnesia cycle, right? So Uvalde happened in May, and we wanted to hire more school police officers, and we wanted to do this, and now we're worried about balloons flying over. I mean, people get distracted, but the problem's still there. Things are still there. So again, back to being a school police officer and having a school police department. We really try to be the model of how that's done, but it takes a lot of work because you only have so many in-service days, and right now we're actually training staff at a different level, only because there's new mandates coming out all the time from Act 55, and a lot of that has to do with how we operate. A lot of that has to do with what our response plans are if we do have situations, not just active shooters. A lot of it is monitoring how we drill, because again, there's a difference between doing a drill, right, and then doing an exercise, right? What's the difference? An exercise is, hey, I'm telling everybody we're going to do this, right? And then we don't do any evaluation on how screwed up it is, right? A drill is we tell nobody, and then we hit the drill, and then we see how we react, and then we make changes, and we move forward on how we're supposed to do things properly. Because again, what's your expectation as parents when you drop your kid off at school in the morning? They're going to come home in one piece, right? They might skin a knee, they might get an F on a paper, they might lose their temper, they might get sick. But you don't expect the opposite, the crazy stuff that happens out there. So that's part of my job, is to make sure that doesn't happen. And we take it pretty seriously. So again, we have 7 officers. Obviously, you're aware of what Springford's like, about 8,000 students, about 1,250 staff. We're right in the middle of a $2.5 million camera upgrade because surveillance is a big part of this. And basically that actually helps our administrators more with some of the behavioral stuff that goes on disciplinary wise, but it helps us with crime prevention. It's also a deterrent. I get a lot of questions usually about, hey, why do we wear uniforms like this? Why aren't we in khakis and golf shirts? Because it's a proven theory that the way you look is the way you're going to present. And there's two reasons for it, right? We have a lot of K through 4, 5 years old, and now those kids love superheroes, right? I want to know what's in every single pouch on my vest. And that's a good 3.5 minute conversation where they're getting a positive impact from somebody that sees them just about every day, right? What's the difference between a regular police officer and a school police officer? When does a regular police officer come to your house? It isn't for a barbecue, right? It's usually for something bad or something crappy happened. An accident, ambulance call, alarm, bad, right? They see us every day, you know, and what's going on? Why are you wearing that? What's up with that? You okay? Everything cool? How's everything going? Great basketball. All these different interactions. I get to have them all day long. And Gwen will be more about that when we talk in a second. So we're about good and trying to get that interaction and try to get that mentoring. And with the mentoring, I'm going to give you Lieutenant Phillips.
Great job. I've trained you very well. I am very lucky. I have been in the school district now for 9 years. I'm just finishing up my 9th school year. I'm waiting for my sainthood to come in the mail any day. I see everything in this school district, from kids who don't eat breakfast in the morning to kids who don't get presents for Christmas, to kids who had the police come to their house last night for a domestic between mom and dad, to students who don't have money for prom tickets, to kids who are being sexually abused. I get the gamut. And my role is, I wear many hats. I can't sit here and explain to you in 30 seconds everything I do in a day because it is so diverse. Yes, I'm a police officer, and like the chief said, we're here for the worst day ever, but the worst day ever doesn't happen every day. So how do I fill my time? Well, part of it is mentorship. We take on kids every year. They're my little buddies, and they come find me in the hallway every single day. And we're all good parents here. Everybody in this room has a vested interest in a child in Park Valley School District. Not every kid who's in this school district has a parent who's as vested as you guys are. So they look for trusted adults, and they look for capable guardians, and that's what we offer. So sometimes I'm the only person that says to that kid when I see him in the hallway, "I'm so glad you came to school today. It's really nice to see you. Is there anything I can help you with?" I'm the trusted adult. Now, that's not for all of my 2,200 kids in the high school, but for the some that need it, it's the most important part of their day. In addition to mentoring, we offer connection to local resources. So I'm lucky that I have the time because I'm not a teacher. I'm certainly not strapped into a classroom all day long. So I float through the building, and I am where I need to be. Sometimes that's at lunches, sometimes that's in hall change, sometimes that's in the popular bathroom where all the kids like to go and vape. So I'm there to be the net, because these kids traverse through the building all day long, and they aren't always around someone who can help them. Our kids seek out help with the guidance counselors. We have very few of them, and they're usually pretty booked up. Right now we're doing course selection. That's a crazy time in the guidance counselor's world. So if we have a kid who comes in crisis and we don't have someone able to see them, that's me. "Hey, come on in, come to my office. Let me get you a snack. Let's sit down and talk. How can I help you today?" Sometimes kids just need a snack, right? They just need food, and that solves a lot of problems. You guys know what I'm talking about. We also connect people to county resources, like Mission Kids, like the Office of Children and Youth, like our juvenile probation officers. We have many different people in our community who are stakeholders who have a vested interest in these children. Touching back on the fact that not everybody has great parents, sometimes things happen to these kids outside of our walls that they need contact with community members who can advocate for them and who can help them. And that's where I come in. I'm the connection. I'm the one that's pushing them towards services to help them. Some of the other ways we help our kids, we have a donation room that we started, which helps clothe students, feed students, offer them toiletries, offer them birthday presents, Christmas presents. We've started this because our officers are boots on the ground, and they see our kids, and they know who needs things. And how do I know who needs what? I see the same kids every day showing up in the same clothes. You think that's a problem? Maybe, depends on the kid, but that's where I open up the door for conversation. Hey, I see you're wearing the same pair of Nikes and they have holes in them. Can I get you a new pair of shoes? Sure, come on upstairs and shop. So we open up the door and we let the kids shop. We also adopt many families for the holidays, and that's where our police officers come in because we're a school. All of our school staff members who are involved with kids are so busy. If you work in the public school system right now, you know how short-staffed everybody is. Nobody has time to connect the dots, and that's our role. So I'm connecting the dots between the counselors, between the nurses, between our social worker, between our teachers, as to who needs help and who needs assistance. And sometimes that's in the form of holiday assistance. So in the high school this year, I think my department adopted and placed about 107 kids, which is pretty good. So that's just one little minute role that we play. We also take on a special needs student every year to be an honorary school police officer. So I wish I brought a picture of our captain who's assisting us this year, but we pick a different student every year. They play a role in our school police department. They assist us in different functions. It's just another way for us to connect with our kids. I'm going to tell you a story real quickly because we do mentor kids, and I want to just give you like a quick little snapshot of what that looks like. I have a student who graduated many years ago, and she's okay if I tell you this story. I met her when she was a 9th grader, and she got in trouble for fighting, and I ended up citing her for that. We started our acquaintanceship back then. 10th grade year, she got in trouble for fighting. I cited her again. 11th grade year, her and I are best buddies. We're talking every single day because I quickly zone in on my problem kids who need the most love and most affection from me. And I talk to them every day. I make sure that we have a strong connection because when something bad's gonna happen, I want them to come to me instead of taking it out in the hallway. So this girl, her and I became good friends. She did not have good parents. Dad's a drug addict, mom's not in the picture. She would see me every single day. We were checking in every day. I was making sure she was getting presents, basic needs met, sometimes money for food on the weekend. And it came to the point her senior year, I said, listen, if you can graduate, if you can just hold on and graduate, you can pick any prom dress you want, I'll pay for it. So here comes prom. She is doing well in school. She picks out the most amazing dress ever. She goes to prom. Of course, I'm at prom, so I see her there. It was a proud mama moment. We took lots of pictures together. I was so proud of her. She came from nothing. This kid had no support systems. And I'm not the only one that supported this kid. There were many staff members who did, but I just made a special connection with her. She's now graduating from Florida Gulf Coast University with a 4.0 GPA, and she paid for this all on her own. She worked her butt off to get here, and she wants to be a social worker, to work in schools, to help kids like we do. So this is a part of what we do. That's just one story of many. And it's not just me, and I don't want to paint us as saints and that we're so great. There's many staff members that do this throughout your school district and throughout ours that aren't police officers, but this is part of our role. Am I missing anything? Anyway, I'm so sorry to take up most of the time here, so it's something I'm very passionate about.
I'm also very selfish because when we build these relationships, right, when you're talking about threat assessment and when you're getting information on things that may or may not occur, we get it, people tell us stuff before it happens in school. Before I have to do the recovery part, we find out about fights, we find out about weapons, we find out about drugs way ahead of time, and it's only because some of these kids are buying into the fact that, hey, listen, we're not here to try to arrest people. That's not our main purpose. We're trying to make it safe, and they want to make it safe. They want to emulate what we're doing. So we try to treat them on a whole different level than what they're probably used to when they get out. I can't tell you how many more stories that Gwen hasn't covered, but we had this one guy, he's one of those giants when he was a freshman in high school. He had gotten in fights with every police department outside of this. And the first time I came in, and finally that aha moment, is when he came in and he had done something stupid over the weekend, and then I see Gwen in front of him, talking to his Adam's apple, telling him, and his head's down, the whole 9 yards, the body language, like, hey, look, I knew I screwed up. So we were making those connections. Again, back to school policing. I am very lucky. I have a very good relationship with both Limerick Township, Upper Providence Township, Royersford Borough. We're also in Chester County with Spring City, and that's Spring City Police Department in East Vincent. We already have our MOU together. We meet very often, and we have a summit every summer. So we can talk about those things like that occurred at Uvalde and what the command and control issues are going to be if we have that terrible day. Also, we have the bypass going right through our school district. I'm more worried about a hazmat situation. We have the train tracks going through Royersford Borough, Spring City. So we have to plan for all those things as well. So it's not just, officers on the ground doing police-related things. We're more of a security force. We audit the doors. We audit our protocols. We audit how we vet people. We check these things over and over again. A lot of staff interaction, a lot of staff training. Because again, a problem that's outside on campus is a lot different than one that makes it inside. So we're trying to keep that level, and it's really a conflict between customer service, right? Because again, all you folks are the customer here, and what's actually the expectation of protection. And we're constantly fighting human nature, right? Because everyone wants to be nice. Everyone wants to hold that door open for the other person, right? You can't do that at schools. We have to vet everybody that comes inside because we don't know what we don't know. And I remember having a conversation with one of our secretaries when I first started. Well, that person's not a bad guy or a bad person. All right, well, describe what a bad person or a bad guy is. You can't really do it. So again, it's 2023. We have to go to a certain level of how we're going to protect our most precious asset, right? Our kids. So again, we do things a little extreme sometimes. Some people think that way. I think of it as, hey, listen, you have an expectation. I'm going to fulfill that expectation to the best of my ability. So again, there is a way about how we produce things and how we treat people. When you're looking to fill those roles, Dean, you have to look for somebody with, hopefully it's a parent, because they understand, right? They get it. Kids do dumb things. That's the whole idea. And that they have patience and that they understand that there's just more ways to solve a problem than the police way to do it. I count on my administrators a lot to come up with that solution, and then we work on it together, and it's always going to be a team format. And I'm lucky now, our new superintendent, Mr. Rizzo, he's on board. He gets it. He gets what we're trying to do. He's our biggest supporter, and we're able to get a lot of things done. I think to date, we have about $3.5 million in grant money that we've been able to procure since 2018. So again, that was a very big thing to ease the pressure off of what we actually cost. When I've had our discussions with Mr. Miller, again, the biggest payment basically in this is salaries and benefits, which are probably going to go over, I assume. But operationally, even for how big our police department is, it's only about $50,000 or $60,000 a year. So with Springford, I don't know what their overall budget is this year, but it's close to $200 million. So if you think about it in a broad spectrum of thing, if you're spending like close to 1%, you're probably where you're supposed to be when it comes to safety and security. But again, I have a very supportive team that works with me. My boss is very supportive, and I already have the local police departments on board because, again, we're taking over a lot of their headache, right? If we didn't exist, they'd have to come to school to handle a lot of these things, and a lot of them aren't really equipped, or they're coming from one hot call, now they're coming to school for some kind of disciplinary issue that turned into an assault. That may not be the outcome that we want, or the outcome that's best for the kid. So Gwen has taught me about this too. I came into this a little bit different, and I had the lights turned on. What's going to be best for the outcome of our kids? How's it going to make them successful? And once you figure that out, it becomes pretty much an easy thing. But it's a constant challenge. We have some other things in place. I was talking to a gentleman earlier. Obviously, you're all aware of Safe to Say tips, right? The anonymous tip line. I'm a big supporter of that. That takes up a lot of time, especially the follow-up. We do a lot of threat assessment, a lot of risk assessment, a lot of site assessment to make sure things are secured properly. We also have another situation, an application called Lightspeed, which is an algorithm that picks up like hate speech on our servers and on our peripherals, all right? So that also gives us an advantage. And what are we really looking for? Any kind of violence that might come in or any kind of life safety issue to kids. Because unfortunately, mental health is a big deal right now, and we're trying to stay in front of it. Did I miss anything? All right, well, thank you very much. Do you have any questions, or is this going to be? All right.
Thank you, Chief. I appreciate you both being here, and they'll both be hanging out, hopefully. We're not going to go incredibly long to answer some questions later. Certainly have a lot to share with us, as you can probably tell by their presentation. So what are some of the roles and responsibilities that we as an administrative team, we as a district have been looking at and have been seeing, not only in our own eyes about what we want, but what's happening with school police and school resource officers across the country and the way they do their jobs? And I think if you look down this list, and again, I'm not going to read each bulleted line to you, but you'll see many of the things that the chief and lieutenant just spoke about. These are the valuable pieces that these roles can fulfill. One of the most valuable ones is at the top there when it talks about enhancing safety and security and providing for a more immediate response. This is the topic that people don't like to talk about. If something happens in this building, the only thing that's going to stop a shooter in this building is someone who's equipped to do that. Uvalde, Texas, Columbine. I can go down a list over and over and over again. The time we wait for school police to get here, if they're in the building, probably under a minute. The time we wait for our responders to get here, anybody's guess. The national average right now is between 5 and 7 minutes. Think about how often a gun could be fired in 5 to 7 minutes. If your kid's in music, picture a metronome ticking back and forth. Some of those instances, unfortunately, that happens. That's my biggest reason for talking about this, is having someone here that can take that action. And it's happened over and over again. The United States Secret Service has published a report every year about averted attacks on schools. I can certainly provide that link to you. It's a public document. I get a copy of it every year from the United States Secret Service, and it goes over how these relationships that are listed here help school police prevent those incidents from happening. I remember when Columbine happened. At that time, although Dave and I were in different law enforcement agencies, we were both on a SWAT team. And we all met in Montgomery County and talked about and followed up on what happened at Columbine. And they talked to the school, and they talked to their friends, and they talked to their families, and they talked to their churches, and they talked to their neighbors, and on and on and on. But none of those people spoke together. Remember what Gwen was saying about those connections she makes? Connecting the dots? That didn't happen when Columbine happened. But I can tell you that I still remember to this day, sitting in that instructional period, talking about that unfortunate event. And each time a presenter got up and talked about the topic that they had, any one of the ones I just mentioned, at the end, they blended all of that information together. You could have predicted Columbine almost down to the minute if all those people would have talked. And that's one of the most valuable things that these folks are doing. And that's why I feel so strongly about having people in our buildings. So we have to decide what's comfortable for us at Perkiomen Valley, and is this acceptable role for us to take? We plan on following the model of the National School Resource Officers Association. They follow the triad model, which is listed here. These three pieces of this, being a teacher, a counselor, and a law enforcement officer, all kind of blend together. Again, as Gwen and Dave have both mentioned, the roles that they take, the interactions they have with students and staff and families like yourselves, they're going to be people that you can call on, that you can speak to. I mean, I get plenty of calls now from parents about concerns, and I'm happy to deal with them. And if we go this route, those will exponentially increase, and that's what it's about. That's about sharing that information. What can we do to help? The triad model has been proven across the country. You're a teacher for them, so what's the number? How many SROs do we have across the nation now? Right, okay. But she's Alice, I'm sorry. But same kind of thing. The last number I read was somewhere around 30,000 across the nation. So they put on a great program. That's where we get the basis of our training here in Pennsylvania. This is the benchmark that Pennsylvania has chosen. So why wouldn't we follow it? Dr. Russell, did you want to speak to this about discipline and intervention?
Sure, I can. I mean, this was a slide that we borrowed from another police department where they actually think about the interactions or the interventions on the part of police, and you've heard some of that from Lieutenant Phillips and Chief Boyer. So we laid it out in a similar manner to the way that we think about interventions in other areas, MTSS, for example, or if you're familiar with the old RTII model. But we talk about tiers and the need for our students being tiered. And so some of the interventions on the part of police are also tiered, starting very simple. It is a lot about relationship building, and I hope that you took that away from both Lieutenant Phillips and Chief Boyer, and something that I've heard about in my conversations as well. It is really important that, that those relationships are established and built upon, and that they can serve as a trusted adult, a go-to person in the building. And then there are times as we advance in those interventions where the police have supported administration on cases, or they've gotten involved and had to write up a student. And in some of the more severe cases, the tier 3, there are some more severe interventions that are as a result of some poor choices on the part of our students. But early on, the critical relationship building is something that's really focused upon and hopefully pays off as those relationships build.
Thank you, Dr. Russell. So what's the role of the school police officer look like? This is the model of the Delaware State Police, but it would be no different than what we would assume to do here. Positive reinforcement is the goal and the focus on everything that we would be doing. I can tell you that the officers that we currently have in our schools now, the school security officers that we brought on this year, constantly giving feedback to myself, to the administrators, to the principals about those positive things that we're already building on with kids in our building, those interactions. You know, I won't mention any names, but one of our security officers came up to me about day 3 and was excited about the 500 new friends he had and the high fives he's getting every day and the questions he talks about for baseball and the activities they're doing and all the interactions that are going on in their little minds. He's in an elementary school. And I got to tell you, when we brought him on, I took one look at him, and he's a pretty big guy, and I thought, an elementary school? But I have to give kudos to our HR director who said, that's where he belongs. And sure enough, that's the first thing that happened, was that positive reinforcement to those kids. Working with counselors, meeting with administrators, being official. If we get to this level, that look will change exactly that. It'll give that role a little more credibility, especially out in the community. Always walking, always being visible. Those are the things that we want to have happen in our building. So what best will serve us here at Perkiomen Valley? On the left side here, you'll see where we're currently at in 22-23 time. We have 8 school district employees and a number of contracted school security officers, only at that level. The plan was developed for this year, for those 8, and then another in the next school year, 23-24. We're recommending the implementation of school police officers in 23-24 as opposed to adding more SSOs. So there's a couple of options that we can consider in doing that. We could do 8 and 8 with just SSOs. That's what was put out there first, but we want to move on to either B or C. So B would be what is more likely as we were referring to as the Souderton model. So would have 3 school employees as school police officers and 8 school employees that would continue as school security officers. And we would divide their time between the schools in the district. The format might look something like an officer at the high school and 1 at each middle school, and then those officers at the middle school would have the responsibility for 2 of our elementary schools. That might be something that we could make work. Personally, and again, in talking with Chief Boyer and people at Springford and other districts, my recommendation is to go the whole way and do every building with a school police officer and supplement it with school security officer employees that we already have. But again, that comes at a cost. And that cost is kind of driven by where do we want to set our line of liability? What do we accept? What's that going to look like? And I'm talking not only about the dollars and cents, but about lives and injury, if that unfortunate event would happen. I'm going to have Mr. Weaver talk to you a little bit about the dollars and cents here. He's our business manager with the school district.
Good evening, everybody. We should have some softer chairs, huh? Okay, so just a general perspective from a budgetary view. As we built the process associated with our SSO program, again, we started out with 8 this year. Those were unbudgeted items. The school board moved forward. They were in agreement with hiring of 8 SSOs. We currently have them on staff. That total billing was $673,686. Again, it's an unbudgeted item, so for those of you who don't understand how we do the budget, that just means that will be coming out of unassigned fund balance as we move forward. The goal then, as we built this in the fall, was then to supplement the original 8 that we have hired with another 8 SSO for 23-24. We built that into the budget. So right now, into the budget, we have $1.4 million associated with salaries, benefits, and all the accessories associated with those various SSO programs. That is what you see in option A. That includes 2 additional vehicles specific to the processes that we did envision at that time. As we've moved forward and had additional discussions, we developed options B and C through additional conversation. Again, no matter which way we look at either option B or option C, you can see that the $1.4 million was our estimate, and we're super close with option C with 7 SPOs, 1 SPO at each building, and then the 8 SSOs which we currently have on staff. Those are positions. Those aren't the personnel that will fill those positions, but remember, those are positions. One other thing to mention, all of those items and the differences between the SSOs and their accessories and the SPOs and their accessories are as listed below. SPOs include weapons and those types of things. SSOs do not. Therein lies the differences from a budgetary perspective as I stand in front of you tonight. We are essentially good to go from a budgetary perspective, whichever option that we do and whichever option that we choose at this particular point in time. Please keep in mind the outsourced contracted services, mainly for our after-school events, through our current contract provider, APC, ends June 30. So the sooner that we can figure that out, the better that we can address those future needs, because we will still need backfill from an outsourced security company for the football games, the basketball games, extra events like the Foundation Dodgeball event that happened this past weekend, those types of things that our own internal staff will not be able to handle them. Okay? So, how about that?
Okay, so I'm going to transition, Mr. Weaver, and we'll come back to this slide, I think, for some questions, so thank you for that. And Mr. Miller is struggling with a cough, but as we close, in terms of what slides we have to present to you and the information we wanted to share that hopefully prompts some questions and thoughts. I've been with the district a very long time. Started in 1985 as a high school science teacher and have transitioned to be where I am today. And some of the ways that we have evolved as a district are not the ways that I would have ever really envisioned. More recently, in recent years, we've added on security, when 10 or 12 years ago we never thought about that. And now we don't think about an activity without having some security. And I wasn't always necessarily a strong advocate for school police officers or bringing police into the school setting. That felt almost counterintuitive to me until recently. In more recent years, the state of our nation in some regards, and what I've learned from other districts, the most powerful piece of feedback that I've received from other superintendents as we discuss this, and most districts in Montgomery County have at least school resource officers in place, the most important takeaway are the relationships that result when these police come into the school settings and represent themselves as not only a police officer, and yes, that enhances safety and security, absolutely, that's number one for us, but also builds relationships with our students and makes connections, they themselves, with other first responders in our community, so really strengthens those partnerships. And as I've learned more about some of the details of the roles that these individuals fill, they're very positive. But that's half of the equation, so to speak. When we think about safe and supportive school environments, school settings, we also think about some of the things that are up here on this list. Some of what we need to do for students that address their social, emotional, and mental health needs. Facility safety, situational awareness, response time, very important. They're critical today. But so are these things that as a district, we've also focused upon. And in recent years, we've added counselors, we've added BCBAs. We have 3 social workers. We're really fortunate in that regard. We have SAP teams, we have MTSS teams. Our board supports placing students who benefit from an alternative setting and more therapeutic resources. We have that option. We offer summer experiences, we offer after-school experiences, we offer extracurricular experiences, because these activities really support kids too and contribute to that safe and supportive school environment. So it's really important that some of these things are called out as well. They matter, and they're the other half of what we think about when we consider safe and supportive school environments. Now, with that, I think we're going to turn it over to any questions that you may have about some of the information that's been shared with you. We're going to come around with a microphone so that the recording picks up the questions, and we'll ask you to keep your questions and comments to about 3 minutes.
Thank you, Dr. Russell, Chief Boyer, and Lieutenant Phillips, and Mr. Miller. Great presentation, really appreciate it. My name is Russ Larson. I'm in Skippack Township, and a question I have for you, and I'm not sure if you can answer this empirically, but do you have a view on, or do you know if there's any studies, and I'll take this question to all 4 of you, have there been any studies or data that shows that there's improved outcomes as a result of having SPOs as opposed to SSOs? You know, in terms of you're building relationships, and I thought that was a really powerful message that you both articulated. And as a result of those kinds of relationships, like bringing students or getting them, you know, affiliated with during the holidays, and just talking to them, is that improving graduation rates? Are there any studies that show that high schools that have SPOs have improved graduation rates? So just interested in a view on that. I think the outcomes, what you said, Dr. Russell, in terms of safety and security, that's number one. I think we could use some of that, but improving outcomes for our students, I think, is a benefit. I'd like to hear more about that. Thank you.
Okay.
while Dean's looking. This is just a theoretical. We had a principal named Pat Nugent that was at the high school for 350 years. Now, he was there for a long time. Great guy. And he brought up empirical data at one of my first interviews about what the outcome is when kids feel safer and are able to get through all their abilities and all the things that we offer, knowing that they're going to have that support system. And it kind of looked like at COVID, that'll be my thing. Kids were way off of their trail, and they went to a whole cyber environment. They didn't have those safeguards that Gwen pointed out. We weren't able to talk to them. We weren't able to really see them for a while, depending on what the status of the, what was going on. So we saw a definite increase in problems, only because in some cases, we were the only stability they had. So the one thing you did bring up about between SSOs and SPOs, I would put back to you logically, what's the point of having any kind of security if it's not going to be able to provide an outcome that you're looking for? If you're going to pay somebody $29 an hour to not be armed and expect them to stop someone that is armed, possibly, right? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense, does it? So again, that's the difference that we came up with. Again, to what Dean said, I went to a class, a guy called Ed Monk. You guys can look him up, but Ed Monk, active shooter. And it's all about risk and about mitigation of loss. And I've had this conversation with our administrators at least 6 times, and you have to put the shoes on of being a risk analysis person. And that's a cold-hearted person. That's not a parent or an administrator or someone that, they're just looking at what the loss versus reward is, right? And I asked everybody, so what's an acceptable loss if we have that day? And what does everybody say? Well, none. But that's hope, right? That's not really part of risk analysis. So being a risk analysis person, what's the number? So I had one of my pretty tame teachers, 7. I have 7 people pissed you off that bad? And they all laughed, and I said, but is she wrong? She's not wrong. So the goal really isn't about anything else about mitigating loss, right? So if we take 30 years of data, because we have 30 years of these tragedies happening, if we don't act within the first minute and a half, you're looking at 10 casualties or 10 fatalities. So then think about response time. And then if you're going to put people in place that aren't armed, that aren't trained up to a standard, I don't really understand the point of that. I don't think you're setting yourself up for failure. So, did you find that yet, Dean?
I did. Thank you, Chief. What I'm referring to here is from the Brookings AEI, American Enterprise Institute study on criminal justice reform. And on page 40 of their 4th chapter, they make a comment. Let me just go back here on the slide. They make a comment that says this, and I want you to think about what our friends from Springford just said. A case study where a county developed a system, changes, and established a detailed set of rules for SPO conduct, much like Springford has, found that court referrals were reduced by 67%, graduation rates increased by 80%, felony referral rates decreased by 31%, school detention decreased by 86%, court referrals of youth of color decreased by 43%, and there was a 73% reduction in serious weapons on campus or charges thereof. And what this report says is, without these things in place, you should focus your funding and your energy on getting this kind of material for your students, these kinds of services available for your community. Well, as Dr. Russell mentioned, we're there. We have that part. We have the BCBAs, we have the counselors, we have the social workers, we have that team established, and very solidly, I might add. So now if we bring on those carefully chosen and selected people that can provide that protection factor that Chief Boyer spoke about, these are the kind of results that you can get. And this report wasn't necessarily in favor of, but it was part of what they studied and what they found. So those are some of the clear numbers that I can provide to you for that. The source again? Sure. Brookings, Brookings, American Enterprise Institute, and they did a number of reports. This is Chapter 4, Reconsidering Police in Schools. It's written by Ryan King and a Mark Schindler. And there are a number of reports that go either way. This was just one I thought was interesting that, in the end it said their conclusion would be not to go this way without these kind of things in place. But yet in the report they referred to those strong numbers. Another question. Yes, sir.
Hi, Jay Cohen, Perkiomen Township. Thank you for the presentation, very, very informative. A question comes to my mind. I know that there are communities in the area here who have also deployed canines for random searches of the buildings and for special events. Has any consideration been given in the Perkiomen Valley proposal for this type of usage?
If that were to occur here, we would be using mutual aid from other agencies that have those kind of resources. I mean, we don't have a consideration here to have dogs within our school district department of any kind. I know Chief Boyer and Springford do not. None of the school police agencies that I'm familiar with have canines. However, municipal law enforcement and the state police do, and if we wanted to go that route with anything, we would certainly consider working in a partnership with them and be happy to do it.
Judy Lofton from Skippack Township. In 2021, Dr. Russell, you advocated to the school board to bring in a supervisor of health and wellness, and that position to oversee many of the resources that have been brought in the district and ensure that they were all working together in partnership, and you didn't have the left hand doing one thing while the right hand's doing something else. That position was added into the budget. It hasn't been filled, and in the year and a half since it was added to the budget, and it's my understanding that it wasn't filled because the district could not offer enough money to an individual who was qualified, who has a mental health background and was willing to come and work in that position in the district. And so I'm curious now why it sounds like we want to bring in police officers to largely fill what are mental health and social work roles. How is it that we have $1.4 million to do that, but we couldn't increase our salary offering for someone to supervise our mental health and wellness staff?
So a lot of districts have a director of pupil services as opposed to, or maybe even in addition to, a director of special education. It's not unusual for some of those student services that are represented in the positions up there to fall under the special education umbrella. Student services. My recommendation, as Mrs. Lofton mentioned, was to bring in an additional supervisor, which is a level lower than a director, to help to really zero in on counselors, social workers, and psychologists and the work that they were doing so that we were consistent across the district and actually working towards the outcomes we were looking for students. We have an organizational chart and we have particular pay scales, and as Mrs. Lofton shared, it was either the second or third time we pursued this particular position. We had a candidate, very strong, offered her the position. Her district came back and countered at $20,000 more for that salary. And at the time, not only was that something we hadn't considered in that regard, but it would also have offset other supervisors in the district in that org chart. So it wasn't, it's an interesting comparison that you make now. And as we look back, hindsight's 20/20, and it's a very fair question. At the time, what made sense within our organizational chart was that we couldn't afford to do that in that particular role. And if one supervisor comes in at $20,000 more than some other supervisors in existence in the district, it just creates different challenges. So slightly different situation, but the point is well taken. Understood.
Betsy Stone. really for you, Jim. All my questions are always for you. Do we know what the insurance liability increases will be if we have armed police in the building?
Yeah. So right now, it's the estimate from the insurance broker, who is our longtime insurance broker, is about $10,000 rider for armed security. Total. Yep.
Todd McKinney, Collegeville. One of the things that, and first of all, I would like to say superintendent, director, chief, lieutenant, and all the administration and folks who are here tonight, thank you for the presentation. Truly appreciate all that you do for our students. The question I have in regards to police and schools, there are studies that indicate that the escalation of matters tends to adversely affect students of color, especially women, young women. So I'm concerned about that, number one, as a person of color. Officer Friendly has a bad day, has to deal with a student maybe being disrespectful, acting out. We've seen all the footage, people getting slammed, fourth graders being handcuffed, arrested. So I'm concerned about that, but again, I appreciate everything that you do. I just seemed that the presentation was a little too rosy for me. So I wanted to hear more about what some of the downsides are in those interactions with students. So, but just a few questions. Dr. Russell, were there any incidences in PV that precipitated us having to have this discussion, number one? And then, what are the training for the officers in regards to working specifically with a school-age population, K through 12? If someone could speak to that. Are there guardrails in place to keep officers out of the disciplinary role? Because in many instances, teacher has a problem with Johnny, you call the resource officer. So that's a concern. Also, for the training, any mental health or DEIJ training specifically for officers dealing with students, and how often, if any? And then finally, what is the screening for a resource officer in reference to DEIJ or mental health to have this position?
So if it's all right, I just want to start, Mr. McKinney, because I do appreciate you raising the question about school police officers in the literature being cited as gravitating towards students of color, and they're the ones who did it, so to speak. And that is something we've discussed as an administrative team. I'm well aware of that in the literature. And there have been rich discussions among some of our administrators about the knowledge of that and the worry that comes with that. We don't want that to happen, so I've described it as us going in eyes wide open and really aware of that and working diligently and intently, if we take this path, not to have that happen. So I think that being aware of it, I want to believe being aware of it, will help us actually change the stereotype, avoid the behaviors, change the stereotype. Your question about was there something that happened that prompted me to recommend this? No, there was not necessarily a serious incident. Is there sometimes a delayed time for our state police to get to our high school? Yes, there is. It sometimes takes them longer than we would like. But there wasn't necessarily anything at the level of an active shooter that prompted this. This is a step that I believe is proactive and can offset or enhance the safety and security we have in place. So I wanted to recognize that, answer that part of your question, and also the question about what's in the literature and what we know has occurred in other areas. The training questions that you posed, I'm going to turn over to others.
All right, training. Wow, a lot of it. More than probably I had when I was a municipal police officer. Even though we're not certified per se with MOPEC, I know giving the air quotes, we still have to maintain that MOPEC certification When we go for our annual training every year, which is 16 hours, our firearms training is beyond what the MOPEC standard is, only because of the area that we're in. It makes a lot more sense if we get more repetitions and more active time on doing active shooter training and whatnot for that day. My folks are trained in MOAB, which is management of aggressive behavior. We also spend a lot of time on who we hire, okay? Because again, when we're having police officers that come from being at police departments for 25 to 30 years, right? They're coming with some baggage. I mean, there's some post-traumatic stress disorder things. There's other issues going on. Also in Pennsylvania, there's Act 57. So back in the day, if you were a bad police officer and you did something wrong, sometimes administrators would give you door number 1, which is you can resign and still keep your pension, or door number 2, we're going to fire you. So we had a lot of movement and migration of people that probably still shouldn't have been in this job. I spent the last 5 years of my job at East Norton in internal affairs. Okay, so I can't make up another volume if you can't make this stuff up, because I can't believe some of the things I've heard or seen over the years, right? So we spend a lot of time making sure those people fit the right role. And we do a lot of field training, almost 2.5, 3 months, to make sure that they're okay with the age-specific places that they're at, and that they do the training that also the school district provides that we have to mandatorily do every year when it comes to EDI, when it comes to mental health, QPR, everything, on top of all this other training that we do to begin with. And I love it as an administrator, because the more training we go to, the more we insulate ourselves for any kind of litigation, and we're putting out the best possible product for our students. We put out the best product for our students. So I try to hire, and Gwen will abide to it, the best. We have people that are, basically wrestling to get a job at Springford, and we don't pay that great, but they know they're going to get the best opportunity to be successful in the arena that they're in. So what are we really looking for? We're looking for someone that still has that passion, that still wants to protect and serve, the service part being more important, and they want to be around kids. The biggest difference between being a municipal police officer and my personal experience is that, you get into a kind of a warlike mentality, because you have to develop some situational awareness close to the edge of paranoia to survive. I go to the schools now, I come home happy, I go there happy. We all have a good, a very good relationship with everybody, because again, I'm doing something positive all the time. So again, back to the hiring part. I'm ruthless. Gwen sits in our interviews. I make very salty veterans very uncomfortable, because again, I am responsible to put that product, that person, in a position of trust with your kids, right? So I'm pretty hard on our folks. I mean, I'm self-admitted to that, but it's for the right reasons. So again, we go through more training actually than municipal police officers do, just because of where we're at. The state mandates most of it. And it's not like situations where you got trained in law enforcement where you kind of got, the pixie dust and you passed. You've got to do everything up to a certain standard, especially when it comes to education. I hope that answered your question a little bit. Again, I think the first time we hired, we had just under 100 applicants. And the way we do it is, give us your mad minute. Tell us why you're so great. Tell us why you want to Springford, why you're going to help all these kids. Gwen usually asks that question, big smile. Everybody tells you how great they are. And then I go, give me the 3 criteria to use deadly force in the state of Pennsylvania. And I look at my watch. Kids are waiting. Kids are getting hurt. If you don't know that inside out, that's like hiring a carpenter that's missing a thumb, right? Might not have the best outcome. I want people to understand that they have to deal with people, they have to deal with little children, they have to deal with older children, but they also have to be able to hit that switch if that worst day comes. And to your question about how we handle force and how we handle discipline, we are very good at standing back and letting discipline occur on that administrative level. That is their job. I made it very clear when we first started that, listen, we're not putting hands on anybody unless it becomes a life safety issue where we have to. So you'll see a lot of videos that we have when we do have fights, and we don't have many. It's a lot of goaltending going on. Just trying not to get your glasses broken, because again, they are kids, their frontal lobes aren't developed yet, they're upset, You know, a lot of times it's a boyfriend-girlfriend thing, and then I had the cameraman on the side with the cell phone. Cell phones are another thing, right? And we're just trying to make sure no one gets hurt. Let the administration do what they have to do. Now, again, the situation that Gwen told you, when we have people that are continually fighting and they're just not getting it, they may have to get, you know, the criminal justice part of this. And again, when we go to that part, we've just created, I don't want to take Gwen's thunder here, but we just brought another youth aid panel into Limerick. We're trying to get diversionary things. It doesn't work if you're going to give somebody a suspension and then give them a citation to their parents. I mean, you're just doubling down. What does anybody learn from that? So again, we're trying to look for what the best outcome is. And again, I don't know what's going on in their personal life. I'm trying to find out. So maybe we can mitigate this stuff so no one gets a tooth knocked out or gets an eye injury, or because no one means for that to happen until it happens, right? So hope I answered a little bit of that.
Thank you. If I could, I just want to follow up. There's also a new law in Pennsylvania, Act 55, that requires all of our employees to be trained or professionally developed in areas of situational awareness, mental health. There's 5 categories: drug and alcohol awareness, suicide awareness. And right now, with contracted security, we don't necessarily have control over that. They work for another vendor. Having brought on our 8 employees, in the future, if we bring on more employees, that's ours to be responsible for. So we would uphold the expectations that we have for others in our organization in those areas for these individuals as well, where it's critical. And I just want to go back and emphasize, there have been conversations about, to your question, Mr. McKinney, there have been conversations about the worry around bringing police officers in and how they may gravitate towards certain students in an unfair, maybe even discriminatory manner. We've talked about it as administrators, and I've talked about it with our teachers' union leadership. And we've had conversations about that. Again, want to be very aware of that. That's not who we are or want to be. And I think one of the things that I've taken away from conversations with our teachers, from the leadership primarily, as well as some groups in different buildings, is it's really important that if we move in this direction, we hire diverse staff that look like the individuals that comprise our school community, and that they are a good fit for our school community. So you've heard that a couple of times tonight. But I think our teachers have expressed favor with this, with those stipulations in place. Yeah. You're quite welcome, and it is very important to me and to us as an admin team. So, and I'm glad that you called that out for us tonight, because I think it's important that we talk about that. Other questions? Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Rhea, you're next. Sorry.
Skipback Township. I just want to preface this. Thank you, Dr. Russell. I appreciate all you do for our community. Chief, Lieutenant, thank you for being here. If we had officers like you here, I might be for it. I just had to preface that. From a report that I read with 141 references through research, the presence of police officers or school resource officers in schools can actually make schools less inclusive. Scholars studying student behavior have found that students are less likely to misbehave in schools with inclusive social environments, where students feel valued, respected, listened to, and made to feel like they're part of the community. There is extremely limited evidence on the effectiveness of SROs in deterring violence. A recent study found that among all schools that experienced a school shooting between 1999 and 2018, the number of injuries and deaths was actually about 2.5 times higher in schools that had an SRO. In some, there is little evidence that SROs reduce the likelihood or mitigate the impacts of school shootings. In the triad model concept advanced by NASRO, in addition to their law enforcement role, SROs will act as another mentor, educator, or counselor. However, this assumption ignores the fact that Black youth, Latina youth, immigrant youth, Indigenous, and youth living in poverty, and LGBTQ youth often come to school with harmful experiences with police that may perpetuate racial inequalities in educational, health, and social outcomes, despite their care for their students' well-being. Additionally, numerous studies show that the presence of SROs in schools is associated with higher rates of exclusionary discipline, suspensions, expulsions, increased risk of students being pushed into the school-to-prison pipeline. There is no solid evidence that SROs reduce crime in our schools. However, there is empirical evidence that schools with SROs have a reduced graduation rate, a reduced rate of students going to college. I feel that there's many more valuable ways to use money and resources in education to support our students and still have safe schools. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Michelle Keating-Seibel. I'm from Perkiomen Township. To the officers, thank you very much for your service. My father was a police officer in New York City for 25 years. So I spent working nights in some of the highest crime neighborhoods. So I spent the vast majority of my childhood wondering if my father would come home that night. So thank you for your service, and thank you to your families. I am concerned that the presentation today made several references to Uvalde. So following that tragedy, the director of the Texas Department of Public Safety actually called Uvalde an abject failure, right? So officers waited over an hour to enter the classrooms and confront the gunman. And I think, Chief Boyer, you mentioned something about those critical initial minutes. And so to reference Uvalde and in this presentation as an example of what an SRO or an SPO would offer, I don't think is a very good analogy. And I still have to ask, and I think as others have, if there is this significant a budget and willingness to almost double what our costs are, why wouldn't we look at increasing the number of school psychologists or social workers that can meet many of the needs that were discussed, and many of the needs that our students have that were discussed and stated earlier?
So I'm not sure if that was a rhetorical question in the way that you wound down or one that you were hoping for an answer to, but I think part of the purpose of these conversations is to prompt more thinking around the ideas that have been shared tonight. So I think that's a very valid question. Ria.
Ooh, okay. Hello, my name is Ria Shringari. I am the 2023 class treasurer. And my question is along the same line of reasoning. Is there empirical data and community feedback that actually shows that we, as a community, PV, have enough social, emotional, and behavioral resources to prevent crises, not react to them? It was mentioned that we have 3 social workers. We have 9 PVSD employed SSOs and 7 contracted SSOs, and are planning to have SPOs in the coming school year. But do we have enough mental health workers in the district? Thank you.
Hear me? I'm Nina Morton from Perkiomen Township. Thank you for your presentation. I took a few notes. Chief mentioned that before you became moved to the school district, you were a police officer and used to arresting people. So there was a process of unlearning and learning or new training involved. I took some notes about some of the things that you guys do, and the personal stories are really heartwarming, and I appreciate that. But as a district, I would hope that we would rely on data, historical data, not just in our district, but in the country. Some mentioned that, I know you mentioned being a mental health, informal mental health counselor, connecting the dots between the kids, social workers, nurses, counselors, special needs kids, becoming police officers for the day and taking pictures. To me, it appeared that we are having armed police officers serve as social workers and mental health professionals in our schools. And Dr. Russell, my question is to you. Do you feel that we are well resourced in those areas? Do our staff have enough training? Our teachers, do they have enough support? Do we have enough social workers? Do we have enough counselors? Because as a parent, that's not what I see. And I know we have to make choices. Also, I want to mention that when you have an under-resourced school, they have to rely on police officers to implement discipline, because when a teacher is overwhelmed with too many kids in the classroom and there is misbehavior because of neurodivergency or mental health crisis or anything else, the teacher has no choice but to rely on the resources that are provided, and it seems like overwhelmingly we are more willing to invest in armed police officers in our schools. So that is my question to you. Do you feel that we are resourced well in other areas? Thank you.
I would say that as a district, we are fortunate with the number of counselors we have. For example, having added a second counselor at the elementary level in the past 5 years, a third counselor in each middle school, a seventh counselor at the high school. We have 3 social workers, 1 at each level. We have 3 BCBAs. So in those areas, we're fortunate as I compare us to other districts. Do we have enough? No. And we can't get more sometimes as we try to pursue that. I think at this time, the era we're in right now, we would benefit from all sorts of more resources. If we could reduce class sizes to 10 or 12 in kindergarten, it would be phenomenal for the students. So there's a balance that we're trying to strike. In many areas of the resources up here, we are fortunate as a district. We still have students that have needs that we haven't been able to as effectively as we would like meet, and we continue to pursue contracted counseling or specialized counseling from some outside services. But overall, as I compare us to other districts, we are in pretty good shape. Needs of our kids are pretty great today. They look different, they're presenting different. So we are making efforts to secure some of those specialized resources that we believe will support them.
Can you hear me? I'm Allie Peterson from Truro. I have some questions that are sort of similar, but we want to focus on a couple things. The presentation was good, but I think part of the problem is that under Act 67, which is the state law that deals with school police officers, school resource officers, and school security officers, the devil is really in the details as to your policy that the district would adopt and what it would specifically allow school police officers to do. Because everything that I heard tonight seems to assume that the school police officers would be armed. That's not a requirement under Act 67. That is a result of whatever school policy you would ultimately put in place. I personally don't know where yet I fall on this, but I would like to hear more information about the determination as to whether you are leaning towards arming the school police, as apparently Springford has done, or not. I would like to know what the data is from Montgomery County in terms of the school districts that utilize school police forces. I represent school districts for a living, and I know many of my clients have school police forces, but do not arm them, including the school district of Philadelphia. They have an extensive police force, all of whom are not armed in their school buildings. So In terms of the data that was also then referenced, I'd like to know if there have been studies on the differences between armed versus unarmed school police officers. School resource officers are in a class of their own because they are sanctioned law enforcement officers working for their townships or municipalities. So that would be one question that I would have. The relationship building facets of this, I think, would be excellent, leaving aside also the mental health needs that we have and can't hire for or have not. But those relationship building facets that our esteemed officers talked about, none of them involve having a gun in a school building. They're relationship building. All of those things that you talked about with respect to being a liaison with your other local law enforcement, whether that's here in Park Valley as the state police, Lower Frederick, Collegeville Borough, that is an excellent opportunity and maybe one that is not tapped into right now because we don't have those officers in our buildings. So I think that that is of great value to me, particularly because our local municipalities are woefully, underfunded, inadequately staffed, don't have police departments, and we are a school district that is very unusual in that regard in Pennsylvania because most districts have local police forces that they interact with on a daily basis who can weigh in on these issues with them. So I would like to see more information presented about the pros and cons of arming the school police and not knowing whether that's a given from what's been presented or not. I am also concerned about not having those local law enforcements and the response times. That is also something that does weigh on my opinion of this, and it's not an easy answer to come to. So I appreciate the time and the efforts that are being taken to involve the community and answer these questions.
Which part of it?
Hi again. They decided to go armed at Springford back in 2008, which was, 6 years before I started. Again, there was a lot of things going on in the nation when it came to active shooter. There was a cluster per se. And a decision was made, since the two people we had working there were actually part-time police officers other places, and we were able to get an origination number and become our own police department. So again, that was the superintendent's mission, and with, I think, Dr. Nugent that I told you before, and then when we checked with our solicitor. At that time, Limerick Township and Upper Providence Township were our two biggest police departments, and they didn't have the resources, as you said, to give up an SRO. It's a big, big thing. And now things have changed a little bit with PCCD and with grants. They're willing to pay for more towards a school resource officer. But again, in your own situation here, you kind of answered your own question about, the state police aren't going to do it. And you have very small police departments that were around you, right? So the only answer I can give you about armed versus unarmed, right? I've been a firearms instructor at the police academy and my own police department since 1993. It's really hard to understand, especially when, if that tragedy were to occur, what's your expectation of the security people that are here? I mean, if they're not armed, you're still counting on 911 to be your plan. And that's, I'm agreeing with you. I'm in the same battle myself right now. I'm in the same battle myself because, again, we're talking about time and when we're able to actually engage this situation. And I'm going to use the word neutralize, not to upset anybody, but there's going to be three outcomes here. Usually, historically, when these things happen, these people kind of know they're not walking away from it, right? So they're either going to give up, they're going to hurt themselves, or we're going to stop them some way, right? And that's just to paint it very clearly. Our goal is to basically, our number one goal is to be able to find this person and stop this person from the loss, okay? Again, and I agree with what you said about Uvalde. It was a colossal failure. And there's going to be a lot of changes with that. But then you're also looking at a situation with Uvalde where they had 6 officers in a huge landscape. So they kind of defeated their own purpose because they weren't able to respond. And then the people they responded to, I don't know what their level of training was. I can only assume it probably wasn't as high as what we're trying to achieve. And it's a constant struggle, I won't lie to you. We're always looking for time, because again, with Act 55, we actually train staff now for that situational piece. That takes away from chief's training time here, because I want to get people on the range, I want to get people to do those things where there's no shoots involved, where we're able to de-escalate things, because that's the difficult part. You know, usually when it's a high octane kind of situation and it's life or death, you only have a couple of milliseconds to make some decisions, right? So you're looking for people, again, who you hire is important, right? But most of the time, we are going to have those interactions where it's just going to be a common use of force situation. Common meaning that you have to be able to de-escalate it. And that sometimes is the greatest, anybody here have kids? It's a challenge, right? Especially when they're not developed enough and they're full of rage, and now you are another what? You're another authority figure just by existing, right? And so, again, building those relationships back and forth. Armed to unarmed, I don't understand, it just my logical mind. It's hard for me to pay somebody X to do Y and not give them the tools to be successful. So I think we're kind of talking about 2 different things here. We at Springford don't get involved with a lot of hardly any disciplinary stuff at all unless it becomes a physical event. And even when it's a physical event, we're there to de-escalate it, basically pull the combatants apart, get them calmed down, and then they basically go to the penalty box and they talk it out with whoever they have to talk out, whether it's mental health, whether it's the administrator, whatnot. If that continues to occur, or if it rises to a level that goes beyond that, then we have to get involved. Quite luckily, I wish I had some wood to knock on. We're looking at about, what, 6 to 10 allegations a year. And allegations when you're doing criminal charges against a juvenile that goes beyond a summary. Okay? Not very many for over 8,000 students. And I'm proud of that. I'm proud that we don't have to do that. And then when we actually have to arrest people citation-wise, it's going to youth aid panel. We're trying to get other avenues here, so that, like I said, so parents aren't getting hit up twice for dumb mistakes that kids are supposed to do because they're dumb kids. That's what they do, right? So again, armed to unarmed, I mean, that's a tough one you guys are going to have to figure out. I just can't see putting someone in that position and expecting them to defend our kids and get that kind of outcome if they're not trained up to a standard and they're not able to defend. Philadelphia is a whole different animal. I actually went to my basic 40-hour SRO training after 28 years of law enforcement with the chief for Philadelphia, and she showed me a letter of all the things they're not allowed to do, which is all the things we do, because it's a different situation. So it's kind of comparing apples with cinder blocks. It's a little bit different. And I get what the realm they're in. But I will tell you, they operate on a different level. When you go to a school in Philadelphia, and most schools still have metal detectors. They have vetting going in and out. Probably one of the safest places you can go is inside of one of the schools. A lot of drama happening outside, but inside, they've taken it to a next level. Like we've talked about that at Springford. I mean, nobody wants to put that drawbridge up yet. Not out here, not in Perk Valley, not in Springford, because that's not the message we want to send. So we're trying to find other ways to do things around that, you know, and that's where the support part comes in. Because again, I said selfishly, I'm looking for intelligence. I'll let Lieutenant Gwen help everybody out. If I get one little piece of information that stops us from having a tragedy, if I'm able to stop it outside, that's a happy meal for me. I'm happy. That's a good thing. Because think about what happens if this happens. What's the business continuity plan? Will your district ever be the same again? So that's what you have to weigh out. And I understand there's not enough money for everything. We only have 2 social workers at Springford. The decline, I know, you guys are beating us by 1, right? The decline in social workers, the decline in the pool to hire people, everyone's poaching from one another. I mean, it's hard. And I said earlier, mental health is huge. It's huge. We see kids come in, and you know they're having an issue. We know what's going on. We just don't know how to diagnose it. And I'm just looking at it from a perspective that, hey, listen, we've got to get in front of this, or the recovery part. So I don't want to do that if I don't have to. So I hope that caffeine's wearing off. I'm just trying to say that's what we thought of. If we're going to have that bad day, there's a lot of pressure on my folks, right, to perform, especially after Uvalde. 7. We have 7. How many what? We have 11. Simple cop math, we don't have enough officers. So again, I brought up Uvalde because it's the last watershed incident that occurred. And I was asked at that point by my board to put together the prospect of what it would cost to hire 6 more people to have an officer at each place. I mean, it's substantial, $850,000. So you have to think about it if you're going to get, and I almost wish we could take the word school police and put it away. I say this all the time. We're kind of like the Swiss Guard for our kids, right? We're trying to make sure, even in spite of some of the things they do to themselves, we're trying to keep them safe. We're trying to keep the outside from coming in if there's going to be violence, and we're trying to keep them from basically destroying each other, right? Because let's look at it historically, right? Usually if there's an active shooter event, and if it's at an elementary school, it's probably somebody that's not associated, or it's an adult, or somebody that's estranged, except for Uvalde. That was a little weird one. If it's going to happen at a middle school or higher, it's probably going to be one of your own kids. That's just historically the facts. I can't make that up. So again, we spend a lot more time on what? Our middle school kids and what's going on, because they're going through all these crazy, terrible hygiene, poor decisions, right? 8th grade, woo, right? I mean, that's what's going on. So we try to spend a lot of our time where we're going to have those problems. But we also have officers that are age specific for elementary school. Because again, if we build that up when they start young, they know they got a friend the whole way through. I just want the trusted adult part. I just want them to be able to say to me, hey, chief, this might be going to go down. Plus the other important part is our administrative assistants will tell you when you walk in the door before the storm is going to hit. It's like the psychic network. They know. So it's really good that we have enough officers to go to as many schools as we do, because we can start forecasting a little bit. At least we try to, but it's a challenge. It really is a challenge.
Ms. Peterson, if I could just address part of your question. So number one, you asked, will these be armed personnel? And my recommendation to Dr. Russell and Mr. Weaver and the board was yes. If we bring these people on, they should be armed for the very reasons that Chief Boyer spoke of. But I would like to get with you when we're done, if I could have a few minutes to talk about those comparison numbers you'd like to see, because I don't have them available to give you right now, but I do want to have them. So if I can put something together between now and next week's board meeting, I'd love to have that for you. Other questions? Yes, sir.
Thank you. Alex Tweedy, Collegeville Borough. I think a lot of the comments I had were already addressed, but I have some specific questions or recommendations on the option ABC slide, if we could go back to that. And I think the big question, feeding off one of the comments from Mr. McKinney, was no immediate need or incidents that haven't been managed. So every option is an increase. So I wonder why option A is doubling our SSO population when we're saying that there's not a specific need. Is there an option of 3 more, 2 more? Why is it automatically 1.2, 1.3 million for 16 total SSOs? And I think to give that a little bit of context, we talked about Springford and Souderton being a comparable school district and Springford being slightly larger. They spoke about their 7 SPOs. How many SSOs do they have underneath that? What are the metrics, both SPO and SSO, for Souderton being comparable with population and building size, and Springford being larger, both building and population size? There's no context to these numbers, and why do we need to go to 18? Why do we need to go to 3 and 8? Why do we need to go to 8 and 8? A little bit of context in that would be beneficial. And also context on the difference between options C and B. You say $4 million. How much could you increase funding for counselors to hire the person that you couldn't hire? How many more teachers could you hire? How many raises could you give with that extra $4 million? More context in how this money is being spent If we can afford it for option C, we can afford it for a lot of things. I don't think there's 3 options here, and more options and more background should be provided. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I will address the numbers here just for a minute. So the 8 and 8 plus SSOs contracted. Early on I mentioned that we're having trouble fulfilling the obligation that our contracted vendor is giving us. Without getting into specifics, they're not fulfilling some contractual pieces of that, so we took it upon ourselves, Mr. Weaver and I and Mr. Moran in HR, about what those numbers look like. This is a hybrid under option A, hybrid meaning our personnel and those contracted personnel. That contract runs out at the end of this school year, and if we go to 8 and they cannot provide the numbers we're looking for, then our 8 people would be doing evening observations of athletics, extracurricular events, rentals, those kinds of things. The focus of the SPOs would be during the daytime when our students are in our buildings. That's primarily would be their focus. The SSOs would be supplemental and again in the evenings. But that's what's driving that 8 and 8 number you see there. We're looking at 16 back and forth, or 15 depending on which model you're looking at here. That's what's driving that, is that our contracted vendor cannot provide what we've been asking for. And over time, it's gotten worse and worse. So that's part of the reason that we were driven in this direction. I'll let Chief Boyer talk about that.
Your question again was how many SSOs we have? We have 7 SPOs. They're broken down in different schools depending on what we're going on. We have 1 SSO. I call him a public safety officer. He's unarmed. He's been there for about 21 years. He also manages my camera system. So some of the things you may not know, you might know, is that we're also school officials. So that gets kind of murky when it comes to criminal prosecution if that needs to occur, because school officials can work on reasonable suspicion. Police officers work on probable cause, different level of standard. When you go in front of a district justice, they're going to want to see. All right, we have 7 and 1, and we contract for traffic. Okay, thank you for your question. What's that? But we use them for sporting events. That's
Okay, so that's
all right. Half of it is we're the ones stealing your APC because they do everything around here for sporting events. So we will supplement them depending on what the event is. Okay.
Yes.
Excuse me. Hi. I'm Christian Seibel. I'm a senior at the high school. I live in Collegeville. I've heard a lot tonight regarding the 3 different tiers that you guys operate under, the 3 purposes, the model: law enforcement officer, public safety educator, and informal counselor and mentor. Now we've kind of established, at least on the last slide, that our school has a lot regarding counseling and mentorship, that kind of stuff at our high school. We have a lot of resources. Perhaps it could be expanded upon. But as of right now, we do have those things. A law enforcement officer, I was just wondering, I've seen a lot of falling back upon this idea that, hey, you guys are almost insurance, that if there is an event like a Uvalde, like a Columbine, like a Parkland, you are able to stop this scenario before as many people could get hurt as would without you guys present. And my concern is that in looking at empirical data and in looking at the Journal for the American Medical Association, I found a study that says an armed officer on the scene was the #1 factor associated with increased casualty after perpetrators' use of assault rifles or submachine guns. In fact, almost by 3-fold. So I'm concerned at the fact that it seems that what's being fallen upon as almost the most important, the critical component of this plan as safety from this kind of event, it seems like, if anything, it might increase the number of fatalities that we'd have in an event like this. So if we understand that we have counseling systems, we have mental health resources at the high school, we have mentors in teachers, counselors, administration, and we know that in an event like this, it may not actually be a benefit. In fact, it may be a detriment to have SPOs on site. My question is, what's left is law enforcement education. And in that case, why would we need officers with firearms, with weapons on school property, 7 of them, 3 of them, however many we may have? What benefit are they providing to our students that an SSO would not be able to provide like we have right now? As a student, obviously, this is a topic very close to home that I think about a lot, which is unfortunate in today's society that we have to be here. But obviously, we want to look at the data and we want to determine what is the most effective solution. And I'm wondering what SPOs are bringing to the table. If not 2 out of 3 of these tiers, then the last one would not need weapons or something like that on site at all times.
Would you like to respond to that?
You guys don't use Alice, do you?
I'm sorry?
You don't use Alice. You use that you guys.
But it's the same concept.
Okay. So I love that you have the confidence, and the other student, I think she left, to come up and speak in front of all these adults and ask tough questions. Kudos to you. I like high school kids because they're free thinkers, and you make me think outside of the box. You're absolutely right. Are there studies? Probably yes. And it sounds like you found one. I would love to connect with you afterwards because I'd like to read it. What I do know is that I'm a part-time national trainer for a company called Alice. And Alice is very similar to what you guys have here. I think you use I Love You Guys or a run, hide, fight model. You probably do trainings, right? We at Springford use the Alice methodology, and it stands for Alert, Lockdown, Inform, Counter, and Evacuate. So I'm a national trainer. I go to different schools in our area when I'm not working during the summer, and I train other schools on how to respond to armed intruder situations. What I can tell you, just like the chief said, there's a little bit of magic that happens when you have a school police officer. I see you every day. I know who you are. I'm making connections with you. In fact, I'm making connections with you from very early on. So there's a different level of connection when it comes to us and our students versus local law enforcement who are coming in as possible SROs. Because SROs typically are from a community are on loan and they're switching out every year, so they're not there to make those connections. I've been in my school for 9 years. I've seen probably siblings, I know parents, kids call me Officer Gwen or they call me Mom. So I am very connected with my kids. But from what I've learned from armed intruder response, a good guy with a gun always defeats a bad guy with a gun. However, right? That doesn't necessarily exclude that there are bad police officers out there who don't do their job. I'm a parent. I have 2 kids in the public school system. I don't trust everybody with a badge to act the way that I would. And that's why we're really stressing good people. And you have to vet your people. But when it comes to armed intruder scenarios, I'm going to share with you some statistics after we're done here about how many people, and there's calculations that have been done by Ron Borsch from the SEAL Academy in Ohio about exactly how many people are, and it's pretty unfortunate, how many people can be killed in that 5 to 7 minutes before someone arrives with a gun to neutralize the threat. So we'll connect, okay? And I really appreciate that question. I love that you guys are confident to ask that, so thank you.
Oh, go ahead.
My name is Georgia Lalade. I'm a junior here at PV, and I'm from Collegeville. And I was just wondering, it was stated before in the presentation that SBOs make students feel safer, and I was just wondering where this conclusion came from. Were there students polled or surveyed? And if this, like option B or option C, were to be implemented at PV, would we have a voice in this? Would we have a place to speak our opinions on this? Would we be polled or surveyed? And if there was a majority against saying they didn't feel safer, would this have any effect in these plans moving forward? Thank you.
Dr. Russell, did you want to address that?
So I can't speak to the data on whether, where the statement that SPOs have helped students to feel safer. I can't speak to that. But I am always interested in student voice and would be more than willing to engage in conversation should we continue down this path and be interested in more thoughts. I have taken the time to speak to our teachers group and leadership of our paraprofessional group, so the groups that represent the employees in our district, because individuals' thoughts and your thoughts as a community are important, and student voice is also important. So yes, to answer that part of the question, I can't answer the other half. How do you know kids feel safer? Do you have an answer for that?
What's that?
How do you know kids feel safer?
How do we know if we feel safer? Well, I think if you were to poll our teachers right now, they'd be very upset if we left. We've had serious situations where we've been able to help people out, not just on a tactical level, but on many other levels. I know from my neighbors, my kids went through this. You guys are already programmed for what you're going to do from a very young age, from what you've already been trained up to do. And unfortunately, I mean, it's a horrible thing. I have talked to parents that start to cry before I even say my name because they already know what I'm about and they know what I'm supposed to be doing. We have not put out any surveys, and it's something that we probably should have done. Because I fill out a ton of surveys when it comes to facilities, this, that, and the other thing. But the situation has been that we've been growing so quickly since 2018, since I got here. I really don't have an excuse for not having that data. I can just tell, and this is just my opinion, by how we're treated by our kids. We don't have a lot of interpersonal conflict going on between us because I think we present ourselves, I like to hope we present ourselves in a way that we're trying to help them out. Now, there's been some different challenges, especially recently, and especially after the pandemic's kind of ended. Like when it comes to vape, when it comes still to controlled substances, when it comes to a lot of things that are going on online. I mean, that's a constant challenge all the time. And I find myself, now I'm in my 4th year of law enforcement, it's hard to play catch up, because you guys are already on, I'm born before, eBay and Facebook, it's kind of where I'm landed at. But you guys are already ahead of things, ahead of time, and plus all the crazy stuff that's going online right now. I mean, think about 90% of what my problem is right now is based on one rumor or one TikTok or what that outcome has all the way across my population. One person says a rumor about bringing a firearm in. What happens to your day? It changes dramatically, doesn't it? Depending on what the situation is. It can be a lockdown. It could be a lot of situations. So again, I like to think that we bring stability, that we bring that, trusted adult situation, but I don't have any data. And to answer what you said before about your survey that you saw, the numbers, we do have some failures. Uvalde was a failure, right? Parkland was a failure. We have a school resource officer. I call them the pop squad. The old guy that they have nothing else to do, but we're going to put him there. He decides to be a coward and not do his job. That's a part of human nature. So again, it goes back to how we vet people when we hire them. And I'm kind of rotten to people because I want to make sure we get the very best product for what we're doing. Because again, my mind's eye is, you have to think it may happen today. What's going to be our plan? How are we going to execute it? How are we going to get in front of this to make sure that we have a very favorable outcome? Now, whatever that outcome is, that's a lot of different questions, right? So I find what we end up doing is we're fighting human nature all the time. Because again, we want to be nice, we want to do this, we want to do that. But that's not really a part of safety and security. So we have done some physical changes. We have some, is this dying on me? It's dying, that means I talk too much. And we do have some devices that are going in to make it simpler to secure if we have to. We've got a lot of things going on. Plus we do a lot of training. It's been every month. Every month something's going on. Our training schedule is completely full. So it's not like we're just this armed presence. We're not a bunch of robots. We're trying to interact. They just passed something that made us very happy because now alternative staff now can be a part of coaching. Because half of my folks want to coach. They want to be involved. So I kind of look at for somebody who's ready to come in and adopt 8,000 people, 8,000 problems. Because if you don't have that kind of drive, I don't want you. I don't want you. Anybody can hire a security person that's going to stand there and just punch a clock. If you don't understand what's going on, you're not going to be successful. So we spend a lot of time doing that, reinforcing, and working with your administrators. I mean, you've got good staff here too. I've worked with them when I was at your football game. Everybody cares about what the outcome's going to be. So that's what we're trying to do. So it's kind of the most unpoliced police department in a sense, because we have a different focus. Our focus isn't so much law enforcement, it's protection at a higher level, at a standard where we can start looking into things that's going on before they become, emergencies. So I hope that answered a little bit of it. We're trying hard, put it that way. I'm wearing myself out doing it, but I'm trying hard.
Hi, Christine Hamilton from Skipback Township. I was curious, first of all, thank you so much for the presentation. For the Springford officers, I was curious, you mentioned the camera systems that are being improved in Springford. And I just remember sitting in the high school auditorium after Parkland and having that security meeting and many ideas being thrown around. So I'm curious, what new security measures have been put in place for PV since then? And are there ones that you would need extra funding that you're still hoping to put in, that some of this funding may come through? I am also concerned just about the numbers, with 16 being there and hearing from Springford, that you have 7, 8 between 11 schools. So just curious how many we really need if that's where we're going.
I think we're going to pull more of that data, Mrs. Hamilton, and Monday night at the business meeting of the board, there is another formal presentation in that forum. So I think we're going to pull that data. Mrs. Smith is taking some good notes for us, and we'll organize that and see if we can get some comparative data. Some of the things that we have done, I could also pass this on to Mr. Miller, but we have increased our surveillance across the district, externally and internally, since Parkland. We have just recently completed an exterior door audit. We had a third-party vendor come in and do that. Next, we want to move to our interior classroom doors. As we think about a long-term plan, we have also upgraded to scan card systems. We'd like to eliminate keys. We have some old keys out there from long ago. So we have a plan that we're moving towards to eliminate those and use scan cards to access buildings. And those scan card systems are regulated. So if I'm a custodial staff member or a food service staff member or a teacher or an administrator, the access I have, the time frame within which I can access, can look different from others in the district, and it can be controlled. We've also purchased a Raptor system for every building so that every building will be set up to have somebody, when they come in, to scan their license and make sure there isn't something on their record that we need to be aware about, or there's something about them that we need to be concerned with. We've got vestibules in all of our buildings. We've looked at a vestibule at district office as well. We care about our schools first. District office kind of, is left there. We had plans for that. We put them on hold as we were thinking about possible renovations. But those are some of the examples of the things that we've done, and we continue to think about safety and security of our facilities and constantly are moving forward with these things. So hopefully that gives you a sense of some of the steps we've taken as a district.
All right, and one more thing. I was curious, just as the student was talking about being polled, to me, one of the most important stakeholders that I'd be interested in hearing from on this are the teachers. So if there's a way they can be polled, and I would love to know where they stand on this as a whole.
To you, Mr. Morton. Yeah, here, just you can respond.
Okay. If I may, my name is Bill McGill. I live in Perkiomen Township for a little over 30 years. I'm a 30-plus year teacher here in Perk Valley. I teach third grade here at Evergreen. I also serve as the Teachers Union president. So about a year ago, I believe it was. We have monthly meetings with the superintendent and a few members of her cabinet. And we brought up the idea of how we thought about armed police officers in our schools because of some of the research we were doing on response time. And we know that if you can cut down the response time, you cut down on the possibility of the number of people being harmed in your building. Come to find out, Dr. Russell was investigating the same thing at the same time. We, as an association, have been talking about it monthly at our rep council meetings for over 6 months. I would say that more teachers are on board with that idea. Some will have some reservations about it. But from what we're hearing from the buildings, more are in favor of moving forward with this. And speaking with my counterpart, the teachers union president at Springford, they have nothing but positive things to say about your police force. In speaking to my counterpart in Souderton, they also have nothing but positive things to say about their police force as well. With this caveat, their elementaries are underserved by their police officers because they don't have enough of them. They're shared out of the middle schools, and the elementaries feel that they're underserved by the police officers. So if we're going to go down this road, which we've been talking to Dr. Russell about, PV has the opportunity to do it right. We have the opportunity to probably go with, I would advocate Plan C, so that each building has their own officer. And also, I've said this to Dr. Russell several times, we need to make sure that we hire a diverse police force. So our students have, our students of various populations have a role model to look up to. I know there's been some concern about using the police officers as like discipline control in the classroom. Well, I also talked to my counterparts in Springford and Souderton, and that's not what they're primarily used for. Do they have to go in, I assume, at a principal's direction, that they need help once in a while? Possibly. But if I think about things how they operate here in Evergreen right now, we have an officer, Mr. Sam, he's a security officer, your security guard, and I would no sooner ask him to come in and help me with the discipline situation in my classroom right now, because we have processes in place and school personnel to help with that, not Mr. Sam. And I can't see me asking a police officer to do something that I wouldn't ask Mr. Sam to do. So it just doesn't make sense that I would reach out to a police officer when we have processes in place in the building to help support students who are having a hard time that day. I hope I've answered some of the questions that kind of came up.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. McGill. Mr. Morton.
No, I just want to offer some comments in the spirit of Dr. Russell's purpose of the meeting, and that these are comments for consideration. I'm not going to offer a whole lot of opinions on which option, but as someone who works in security and law enforcement for over 30 years now, I've been in law enforcement. I've been out of it for several years now, but I've done the job, so I appreciate what you guys do. And it sounds like you're doing it very well at Springford. In fact, it sounds like the panacea of school policing. If someone had never heard about SROs or school policing options and came to this meeting, they would think this was the greatest, most perfect thing ever. And maybe you're doing that kind of a job, and it sounds good. I like some of what you're doing. However, I would say that part of what I do now in my job is I advise senior executives on security decisions, threat assessments, risk management, all over the world. I always have the negatives. So when they ask me about an option, I will say, well, here's what you get, and here's what's not so good about this option. Here's what can go bad, and I give them that, and they make a decision. You're gonna do this or this, here's the bad part. I haven't heard much negative from you guys other than we don't have enough. That's not really a negative. I think a negative would be, what happens if I introduce law enforcement into a situation that now takes school normal discipline or behavioral conditions and change them into law enforcement decisions? Because best intentions aside, that will happen. Frustrated teachers, a complex incident, frustrated child, next thing you know, a simple scuffle turns into someone cited or arrested or in the system. Formalizing regular kids being kids. And as I've heard you mention tonight, kids being dumb and, to use your words, and not fully developed are gonna do dumb things. Should that be criminalized? I would say no. And I think that I heard a lot of positive things that the district here would take steps to not do that. You guys are doing that in Springford, so I think that's great. But I think we can't pretend that that won't happen. It will happen. I can tell you it will happen. I work with SROs. We've had them at my old department. I dealt with a race riot at the school. I mean, I've been to some crazy stuff. Things happen that you don't plan for. So I think it's important to consider that. The other thing, and the lady back here mentioned it, is what other mitigations does the school have in place? You mentioned there's a plan to work from the perimeter out into the interior with the doors and things. I don't think that only these options are the only thing, particularly when you look at the cost benefit. From what I heard from the chief and the lieutenant and from the safety director here, the main purpose of this is to prevent an active shooter. So this is, and if you look at the stats, technically, although it sounds bad for me to say it, it's an unlikely scenario. If you look at the data and you look at the numbers. When it happens though, it's horrific, like a plane crash. They don't happen often, but when it happens, it's bad. Are we investing in an initiative or considering investing in an initiative for a catastrophic event when there are other ways to mitigate risk? So that's all I'm offering, is to have that as part of the conversation. Think about beyond only this model and what else could be done. Last but not least, I would just say that I think I'm not against the police at all. I used to be a cop. I think police are great and do very important jobs, but I also think it's not fair to impose social work on police officers. I think a lot of times we expect the cops to solve all the community problems. Oh my God, crime is bad. Well, we need more cops to fix it all. Community problems aren't all because of the police not doing their jobs. There are other bigger issues beyond the police. So I would encourage the school to take a look at, the district to take a look at the other mental health concerns people raised in here, some very good comments about other solutions and other resources that can be brought to bear. And just to kind of look at that whole in a holistic way, not just we need cops because something very bad might happen. I mean, there are other solutions. So I just want you to consider that. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So maybe we'll just take one or two more questions. It's getting late, and as I mentioned, we have another presentation Monday night. So Noor.
Hi, I'm Noor Kaur. I'm a freshman and a journalist at the high school, and my question is for Lieutenant Phillips. My question is, what have you noticed communities' biggest fears or concerns are regarding the initiative, and how would you respond to them? Because I know that me and my classmates, most of our biggest concern is the use of weapons on the campus, and how should we feel about this?
Thank you.
Well, I can't tell you how you should feel about this, but I've hosted community events similar to this when we first brought in our armed intruder program a couple years back. Parents are concerned. I'm concerned. I have children, like I said, and I'm very concerned about who interacts with them. Yes, there are weapons in your school. This, again, comes down to vetting the correct candidate to be in charge of that item during the school day. Parent concerns, vary. Initially, if it's a new parent in the district, we have during the school day parents that will come in and will walk their student around with a guidance counselor, and they see us, and initially they are a little taken aback by the fact that there's a uniformed police officer in our school. What I will say is that this being my 9th year, when we have back to school night, many parents will come up to me and say, oh my gosh, you're Officer Gwen or you're Lieutenant Phillips, and my child talks about you all the time. And I say, oh, that's so great. Who's your student? And they tell me the student's name. I have no idea who this child is. I don't see them because they're probably a really good kid, and maybe I'm not interacting with them as much as I would with a student who's down at the office a little more frequently. But we have a very good relationship with our kids. We do a lot of student presentations. We interact with them at pep rally, at prom, at graduation, at all these major events. So they know us, they're very comfortable with us. And that translates into going home and speaking to us, or speaking to their parents about us. And not just here at the high school, K through 4, you know, our little kids see us out in public and they wave and they get so excited, and their parents will constantly tell us, we're so glad you're here. And that's the one theme that especially our K through 4 officers experience when the parents are seeing them at drop off and pickup. Thank you so much for being here. It makes me feel so good to know that when I drop my student off at Springford, there's a police officer in the building today. And we're just really grateful that there's that level of security. So overwhelmingly, very positive feedback from families about having us in district. And that didn't happen overnight. That will take some time. And that will be your department proving themselves every single day that they're worthy of wearing this badge and that they're worthy of serving you.
Thank you. Yeah. I'm going to go. Go ahead.
Can I go? Oh, sorry.
Hey, go.
I'm Kathy Lesage. I'm a parent in Skippack. I don't have so much of a question as probably just a comment, and maybe I can offer you some information. Skippack Township is one of our communities that does not have community policing. We do rely on the state police for police services. I have run for elected office in the township, so I've had the opportunity to speak with hundreds of our residents about their feelings about our community policing. And I can tell you that overwhelmingly people are content with the status quo. There's basically no interest in having a local police force or paying for a local police force. At the same time, the main concern of our residents is property taxes and school taxes. So it seems to me, anecdotally, that I don't think that there will be a lot of support for more school taxes going toward school policing. I don't think people are really interested in having our children policed more stringently than our community at large. I also wanted to mention that at last night's school board work session, it was mentioned that PV is one of, I believe it was said, 3 school districts in Montgomery County that do not have full-day kindergarten. It seems to me that if we are going to have a budget line item doubled, that maybe we should think about, you know, putting that money toward our youngest learners and getting them off to their strongest start, and maybe, you know, preventing from the earliest days as soon as we can, you know, any behavioral issues, mental health issues, any other issues that could, you know, ultimately affect behavior, you know, throughout their school careers. So, just something to think about. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ava Bellino. I'm a junior at the high school. I live in Collegeville. My question is, how much discretion are the officers given when it comes to making arrests? There's been a recent uptick in drug activity at the high school. So I'm wondering, is the plan just to arrest all of these students that clearly need help, like what's the plan?
Yes, there is increased drug activity in the high school, especially with like THC vapes. Is that what you guys are experiencing here? We have a lot of discretion, okay? There's pretty clear-cut things that we have to arrest for in the crimes code. THC vapes are not one of them. We have a diversionary program that we will put our students into for second offenses, third offenses. First offenses is handled administratively. So that means you would have a talk with your principal, they would call your parent down, there would be some level of discipline from the school. Most times we are only getting involved because they want us to test the vape to see if there's THC in it or if it's just nicotine, because the school district does handle those two things differently. But for us, we are not getting involved until the administrator says, Lieutenant Phillips, I have tried and tried with this kid. They keep coming back and reoffending, and we need to get them some help. So at that point, we're gonna do a SAP program, and we're gonna refer them to our youth aid panel. Now, our youth aid panel, I don't know if you guys have heard of a youth aid panel. We have a community group of residents who have a vested interest in our students, and they reflect our student population. So there's women and people of color in this panel, and we let our student go through the panel instead of a criminal citation. And the panel will see the case, and they'll hear what the student has to say, and if that means a diversionary program for substance abuse, then they're gonna ask that student to go through that program and complete it. They may have the student do some level of community service. For example, if there's a fight, they might say, okay, you're gonna have to do 10 hours of community service wherever you can find a way to do it. Once they've completed that process with the youth aid panel, it gets kicked back to us and they say, student has completed the program and they are clear from our records. So we don't put you into the juvenile justice system. That's not our goal at all. We don't want you guys to come out of high school with a criminal record, right? So especially with things like vapes, that seems like almost all these kids are doing. We are not trying to get involved. Usually that's a principal issue until they call us in and say otherwise. Does that answer your question? That was a great question.
Hi, how's it going? My name is Philip Christian. I'm in Collegeville. So you guys talk about hiring and how important getting that right is. So my question is, I think, Chief, you said you have been there since 2008. Is that incorrect? 2018, okay. So from your knowledge, has there, or since you guys have had this police force, has there been anybody that's been had to have disciplinary action or has been fired from this police force?
Initially, when I first came on, you guys hear me okay? We had one person make a mistake before they actually got their court order. So one of the things, sorry about that, everybody can hear me now? We had one person make a mistake early on. They weren't actually had their court order yet. So until you have your court order and you're basically ordained by the common pleas judge and I get you sworn in, you're not a police officer. But some training has to happen ahead of time. They made a mistake while they were on there. They were given an opportunity to resign. It was that serious. Again, if you can't use good judgment all the time, we're working inside of a china closet, and I keep using that metaphor. It's very important. The standard is very high for us. It's very high because it has to be. Kids are involved. You can't make mistakes. We have people that have had situations where you would think they would lose your cool. I could show you videos of a normal person would probably have lost it. And then, like I said, we get into that pass blocking mode because the fight gets so to a certain level. So that's been my only disciplinary. Obviously, we have PMs, basically performance management things for, things like missing your time cards, normal employee stuff. But anything really dramatic, no. And again, as I said, in my career at East Norriton, I did a lot of internal affairs and discipline work. So I kind of know what the standard is, what's expected, and then we try to exceed it every time. Again, I also have a very, very good HR director. You have a great one here as well. And he will tell you she's the most intimidating person I know. So once we get to a certain situation where, again, we're dealing with people that deal with firearms, we're dealing with people that deal with defensive tactics, we're dealing with people that, you know, had this higher level of responsibility, so they get held to a higher standard. Again, you're dealing with children most of the time, so I can't have those mistakes. All right?
Tracy Tweedy, Collegeville. There's been quite the sales pitch tonight, but I feel like we haven't seen enough data. I was expecting to see more long-term funding information, what this looks like, not just for these years, but going forward. Back to the concern about sales taxes, school taxes. Our district, we know, is woefully overburdened because we have less residents for how much space and land we have. That's one concern. The other is, what is the timeline for making this decision, Dr. Russell? Because that's another thing we haven't seen. After what we saw last night, I have concerns that this may try to be pushed forward quicker than it should be without proper vetting, without more information going out to the community and letting people make their voices heard.
I think the request for more budget data is something we'll gather from Monday night's presentation. And I think we need to have another conversation at the board level that will happen Monday night in public before I can really give you a definite timeline. So there isn't one right now. You know, this was really important to me that we engage the community to prompt our thinking and hear about some of what we should also be thinking about before that's really defined. So.
Kelly Carney, Collegeville. To follow up to Tracy's question about the timeline, similar to mine, there's a budget that's going to have to be due. And so I would imagine this needs to be made for that if we're going to implement this for the 23-24 school year. So we're going to be up against that timeline. And then where will further discussions occur? Will they only occur at a board level? Will they be at the committee level, and what committees would they be? And then I also just wanted to make an observation. The officers here, you guys are great. It was really great to hear from you all. I imagine that you do, you and others like you do stop, prevent, limit things that happen in schools every single day through the relationship building and the mentorship that you mentioned. None of that has to occur with a weapon. And so the one thing I haven't heard today is when a weapon has actually stopped the worst day of our lives in a school. I've heard where officers have had weapons and it has not stopped the situation, but I haven't heard where it's actually been helpful. And so just an observation, I don't know if we want, if there is a scenario where that has happened, aware that we're doing that every day through our actions within the schools and with the relationships, but when has pulling a weapon actually stopped a mass shooting at a school?
I'll take that as a rhetorical. I don't have an answer to that, Kelly, but I think it's a reasonable question. And again, some of the data that I think we want to mine and have ready for Monday night based on some of the questions tonight. Right now, the 2-year plan was to have these 8 employees hired this year, SSOs, and 8 more next year. They were originally, that was the original idea, I should say, and over time that's now morphed for us to consider something different. So those monies were set aside in the budget for originally those 8 SSOs as the conversation started to morph, and we opened up to the idea of SPOs and thought about that for the district. The budget monies are in there. Whether or not that could happen for the fall, that would be a logical timeline for me, but I can't say that for sure right now. I think we need to have some more conversation at the board level before that happens. This hasn't gone to a committee. It's been discussed. If it would be discussed, I would predict it would be discussed at Finance Committee of the Whole, which occurs in front of the board during the work session.
Hi, Susan Coburn. Oh yeah, it is working. Perkiomen Township. I actually have a couple of questions. The one would be for the officers. We talked a little bit about the training that you receive specifically in regards to our students of color. What sort of training do you receive in regards to students with autism or ADHD or ODD and how they specifically respond? My other question, have a lot, I'm trying to get it out. I have two options, I laugh or I yell. I'm sorry, you get what you get. Second question would be currently at PV, what is our policy? What is our procedure if a student brings a weapon on campus, a gun or a knife? How is that different with our armed officers? And then the third question would be, should this not be going to a public vote, something like a referendum to get all of the parents involved in what we actually want or are comfortable with for our students?
Okay, so the training part you asked about, under MOPEC, municipal police officers, they actually gave us they give us modules specifically on autism and dealing with it. We actually had Alex, right? Was that his first name? We have a gentleman here who has autism, comes in and gave us about a 8.5-hour presentation on his personal. He's gone to every police department in all these counties. Great kid. But we get some specialized training with that. Plus, on top of the CBT's computer-based training we have to do for the school district. So again, and unfortunately, our population is growing with these situations. So again, we're kind of lucky at Springford with the amount of help we have on top of that. So going into it, making those connections, if we're going into a situation where there's self-harm, there's already teams in place to handle that aren't law enforcement, that aren't uniformed. So it's all my concern as a safety person, because I'm part of the safety committee, but we don't get too locked up into that. But in dealing with folks, we've had a couple of situations where we've had people elope that have autism because it's common, and you have to treat that in a different manner than you would for a kid that doesn't have that kind of issue. So we've had that a bunch of times. Again, so we have some experience with that. I have some personal experience with it as well, and so do some of our other officers. So we do strategize about this because it's on the radar. I mean, it's happening all the time. Could you repeat your other question again? You yell. I heard you yell. So. Oh, well, okay. So there's a lot of that's a lot of leeway for a weapon on campus. Okay, so we go with board policy what weapon on campus is, right? So it depends on what the situation is on gravity. I can tell you the first 45 minutes of the school year this year, we had a domestic situation where a person brought a pellet gun in that would probably have gotten them in a life or death situation if they were to pull it out. Okay, and his whole sole purpose for having that pellet gun was to inflict fear on this person that he was breaking up with. So what happened with that? Went right into the disciplinary process. We had to detain him a little bit differently until we made sure it was a pellet gun. I'm just giving you this as a reference. And then there was some criminal prosecution at the end of it, okay? Only because that's where the line is drawn. We've had a lot of people that come in, parents that are workers and whatnot, they'll have knives. We've had some students that have knives, pepper spray. Again, it goes through the administrative process if it's not used in the commission of an assault. I wish I had some wood on that. It doesn't happen very often. It's very good. It's very good. We have good kids for the 90% time. And what ends up happening in our world is we end up spending a lot of time on the 2% that are just kind of off the charts. But there's always a lot of other reasons why they are off. They're not necessarily bad people. They just have some interesting situations. I don't want to say crappy, but you kind of know. So we're trying to figure that out for them so they don't leave our school, become bad citizens, end up incarcerated over what, So we really take a lot of effort to do that. I've had a lot of people show up that carry concealed weapons that come to sporting events. And then we have to have that talk. And the talk's a very short talk, you can get back in your vehicle and leave now, or we can arrest you now for the misdemeanor for carrying a weapon on school property. So there's a lot of situations. It depends on what's going on. Luckily, we don't have that per se. But we are very hypersensitive. You know, we have people drawing pictures, we have people writing things down. So everything's got to be followed up. And there is a risk assessment and or threat assessment depending on what that situation is and whether that person has any kind of skill issue, you know, like an IEP or 504. There's a lot of different ways this goes. So we're actually working on now is flow charts to make it kind of, I call it cop-proof. If you have this and it turns into that, and it's, you know, make it very simple because it does get, they kind of carry over. Title IX, and then we get to this and that. There's a lot of things that, you know, again, aren't really in the police world until you're here. So we want people making the right decisions because, you know, we don't want to get sued and we want to do the best for the kids. So did it answer your question? All right. Cool.
Thank you. Okay, I think we will attempt to close tonight, and I really appreciate you coming out. I appreciate the questions. You've really prompted our thinking and given us some work to do as we prepare for that more formal presentation to our board. It's a special presentation which will occur Monday night, high school library at 7 o'clock. It's also live streamed if you're not there. But please feel free to also reach out to me or to Mr. Miller with any follow-up questions. Happy to entertain those. Don't want you to be wondering. Thank you for coming out tonight. I appreciate it very much. Take care. Thank you, Chief Boyer and Lieutenant Phillips, too. Late night. Thank you.